Hi there, it's Lynn from Lifeyoga. Welcome to ASANA Tools. Today, I want to talk to you about forward bending. You know, I have so many students, clients, people in the world come to me and say, oh, I can't touch my toes, I'm not flexible. Or, oh, I bend forward and my back hurts. Or, oh, my PT told me to bend my knees when I bend forward so I don't hurt my back. Or, my hamstrings just won't release. I'm just tight. Or another thing I get is, wow, I can forward bend, but it really hurts in my hip sockets. So today we're going to kind of look at a bunch of different ways and aspects about forward bending and really get to the biomechanics of it and just the actual physics of forward bending and what it takes to cause a forward bend to really be happening and what it takes to actually release the fibers of the hamstrings and the muscles in the glutes and the hamstrings that are tight that prevent forward bending. So before we do anything else, let's go over to the drawing board for a minute and check out just some physics and biomechanics. Okay, so here we are at the drawing board. Things you really need to know biomechanically and energetically about forward bending. Number one, your breath. You are alive because you breathe. Your breath controls your subconscious nervous system, which controls your conscious nervous system, which controls your results in working to gain flexibility. So above all, if you're not breathing, expanding your inhale, releasing your nervous system in exhalation to move energy through your body, you're not going to create any real long lasting change. It won't happen. You'll just tighten back up. You might move it a little bit, but you'll tighten back up and the real change won't happen. So how you're breathing is number one, really important. We'll go over that as I show you the posture and teach you forward bending postures in a bit. Number two, mobility versus flexibility. So you notice I'm holding some spaghetti noodles here. These guys right here, these are the stiff guys. So keep in mind, mobility is the ability of a joint, of motion in a joint. It's not flexibility. Flexibility is a combination of mobility and the ability of muscle fibers to move and separate and lengthen. The combination of mobility and flexibility is what we call recruitable flexibility, and that's what actually allows you to be able to functionally use your flexibility and movement. So we have a couple things that happen here. If you're tight, I have so many people come to me and say, hey, I'm tight, my hamstrings are tight, I'm just immobile, my hips are tight, my glutes are tight, my hamstrings are tight. Well, your mobility in your joint, in the fulcrum of the pelvis, I'm just going to use this noodle here for now. If you're a tight person, right? If we take this noodle, right, and we don't have mobility in the joint, if we don't have enough mobility in the joint for you to functionally stretch, what's going to happen is that. And you really do not want that to happen, okay? What happens is if we bend it, right, and we don't have that flexibility in the joint, the fulcrum of motion in the joint, what's going to happen here is something is going to give. And what happens in forward bending and why we have so many injury issues in forward bending is the fact that people don't have the mobility in the joint to begin to stretch. So they just put that pressure on and try to bend forward, and instead of the fulcrum of movement working from what we need here, which would be a 90-degree angle, right? If we take this and you're tight and we do this, right? That was your disc just blowing right there because you didn't have it. But once we have a fulcrum, a place from which the movement can happen that's working, so this would be your legs and this would be your back here. Once we have it 90 degrees, then we can begin to functionally bend this forward. If we don't have it 90 degrees, it's just physics here. This big beefy muscles, all your glutes, all the stuff in your hip joints that are really tight, that is stronger than where your hamstrings connect, back here in the back of your knees, ow, you pull them there, or it's stronger than the disc. So either one of those places is eventually going to give. That's why so many people have so much pain in their backs and forward bending, and why it's somewhat dangerous especially if you have disc issues or low back issues, or have repetitively pulled your hamstrings, to keep stretching the same way, because the weak spot on either end is going to give. So that's you if you're stiff, right? We also have the people, this doodle's a little trashed here, it's a homemade pasta, but who are hypermobile, meaning that everything just bends everywhere, right? Well, what happens there is if I'm hypermobile and not a lot of noodle here, whoops, drop those guys. If I'm hypermobile and I just bend in half like this, there's no tension, there's no support on either end. So if you're not engaging, if you're somebody that just flops around and flops into flexibility really easily, and you're not engaging energy muscularly through the movement, and your joint is so mobile, what we call hypermobile, where it moves past where it should and doesn't really have a lot of strength around it, that means your connective tissue is loose. I'm not going to go into great detail there, but it means your connective tissue is longer and looser, and it doesn't hold the bone, the head of the femur and the joint as well. What happens with that hypermobility is you may be able to flop into a forward bend really easily, but you're going to end up grinding the head of your femur into your acetabulum, into your hip socket there, the line in your hip socket, and create a lot of labral tearing, a lot of pain, a lot of flexibility that is not recruitable, meaning that it's not usable. So there you go, there's your noodle analogy. Okay, so we established we need to have that fulcrum of movement. So what that is here, fulcrum of movement in pelvis, right? We need to have this 90 degrees. If you don't have the 90 degrees, right? Again, if you're pulling from here to here, something up here is going to give, or something down here in the back of your hamstring is going to give. So you're not doing anything. The other thing that's really, really interesting, if we jump down here to number 5 really quick and talk about muscle fibers versus connective tissue, right? If this is a big beefy muscle here in your behind, here's your head, do the pen will work, give you a smile, and here's your feet, right? If you're really tight in here in the pelvis, right, this is the biggest beefy muscle down here in your hamstring attachments down here, where all that stuff attaches behind your knee, little itty bitty piece of connective tissue. So when you bend over like this and you pull, it's either going to pull on the discs here, like I said before, or it's going to pull on this connective tissue behind your knee. So if you're bending over and forward bending and getting a really good sting behind your knees and thinking, yeah, getting a good stretch, what actually happens here? This is so cool. You have a little guy in your tendons, so tendons connect muscle to bone there, called your Golgi tendon reflex. And what he does is he kicks in when he gets pulled on too hard, and he says, you're pulling me away from the bone, you're pulling me away from the bone. Give him a little frown there. He gets really unhappy, and he immediately kicks in and tells all of your muscle fibers in here in your hamstrings to go into flexion, to basically hold, so that nothing will pull anymore on him, because he thinks he's getting pulled off the bone right there. What that does is you think you're getting a good stretch because you feel the sting behind your knees, when actually what's happening is your muscle fibers are tightening against the stretch you're doing. So if you're one of those people who stretches your hamstrings and you get a good burn and then the next day you're twice as tight, that's probably you. Okay, so what happens here is that now we're here. If you're up here, this is your low back issue injury stuff going on here. If it goes the other way and it starts pulling on these discs, everybody has what we call a natural lordotic curve in your low back. You got a little, goes like that, and here's your kyphosis, here's your lordosis. Everybody has a little bit of that. So if we pull that out of there, and we pull this out of this positioning and take that curve out and start to pull it the other way with tension on it and tightness, pretty soon what that does is it gets into your intervertebral discs, and you can really blow discs very easily in forward bending. That's why men especially blow discs in here in forward bending. Now women, in the sacral joint, you know, your low back right there, your sacrum, that big bony plate back there, in the back of your pelvis there, that goes down to your tailbone, your coccyx. Women have, if you look at a skeleton, don't have one here today, but if you look at a skeleton, you see that little line across there. Well, that's called, that's the fusion of where the joint, your sacral joint, where the pelvis connects to the sacrum and the rest of the tailbone there. What happens in that joint with men is age 30 about, that fuses. It just loses all its mobility. So now there's no give at all in that portion of your low back for any tension pulling on it. Women, a little more fortunate because we get to have kids, so that guy has to stay mobile to get the kids out, get the babies out, so that gets a little more mobile. But men have a huge issue here because they're working on this big fixed point right here, and if there isn't this 90 degrees of flexion in the hips, right, and you don't have that, and this is really stiff up here and you're not getting this, it's just physics, it's going to pull on that and pop it. And that's why we have such a high incident of back injury and low back injury in men with tight hamstrings. That also, low back injury, that feeds upon itself because then it gets really tight in there, which disallows the hip mobility, which disallows the hamstrings, and it's a cycle that feeds itself. So be really aware about that. You are not safe in your low back unless you have 90 degrees of flexion in your hips. You're just not safe. It's going to pull here. It's going to pull even up to the vertebrae in your neck. If you're really tight, going to tear some hamstrings in there. So what we're going to do when we go back to actually teach you how to forward bend is teach you how to get this 90 degrees here. Even by bending your knees, by putting yourself on 10 blocks, you need to have that alignment and length through the spine at 90 degrees to prevent injury. It's just the way that it is. Okay. Number 6 here, and lastly, forward bending is a full body experience, meaning that connection is causal. It's causal in your subconscious nervous system. It is causal in the connection, kinesthetic chain of your body in movement. So however I connect energy from this fulcrum of my pelvis, right here, once I get that 90 degrees, through both ends here, and connect that, my upper back flexibility has a direct correlation, and the holding patterns in here has a direct correlation to my hips, just as my hips have a direct correlation to what's going on up here. So goal as far as movement through the kinesthetic chain, meaning where we start the movement from, where we initiate movement from, location in the body, energetically and also just muscularly, anatomical firing, positionally, how we originate that in the kinesthetic chain, where we start from and how we move it through, and whether it makes it through to both ends directly affects our ability to create flexibility in one area. Because you can't just stretch your hamstrings and have this be tight, because eventually you're going to go back and this tightness is going to affect this in your movement pattern, and you're going to be back to square one figuring that out. Same thing in hypermobility. If you're just loosey-goosey and you go to stretch one area but everything else is flopping around, that whole spaghetti noodle has no control and you can't functionally use it in movement. When our flexibility does not assist us in functional movement, that is when we get injured. So you got to go with what you have. Remembering, it's life yoga, it's your body. You can only come from where you are. So if you're really tight and your forward bend starts here, like I'll show you on a tabletop, what if I had a pen? But bending your knees and bending over a tabletop just to get this angle here and move the energy to begin to pull from the origin here of where the energy's moving, to pull the tailbone up, to send energy down through the legs. That's all you need to do. It's not positional. Yoga is not positional. Nothing in life is positional. It's energy moving through, and how you do that actually facilitates a change. Note to self here, since we'll be talking about this when we go back outside, once you find this 90-degree angle, how we expand and release the breath into this fulcrum of movement is going to determine the change. So, little itty bitty connective tissue here, right? Discs up here. We want to take our pelvis in forward bending and originate the movement from here and actually use our low abdominals, transverse abdominis, pelvic floor to just begin to lift the pelvis up away from the heads of the femurs. That action, if I can get this pen to work, which I can't, but that action there is what's going to allow you to eventually move from this fulcrum and bend that piece all the way down to here and be in forward bend. It doesn't come from the top of your back, it comes from the fulcrum of where the movement's happening. So, let's go back and do some forward bending. I'm going to give you a few options here. Keep in mind, this is forward bending 101. We're going to go to 102 and get into, after this video, once you do this and you read the blog and get the information, we're going to go back in and really fine tune all the tiny anatomical adjustments in forward bending 102. So let's get back to it, get back to the doc and check it out. Okay, so here we are, forward bending. First and foremost, remembering the facts. You're alive because you breathe. Breath controls your nervous system, which controls everything about you, including your subconscious ability to allow your muscle fibers to release. Very important. So if we inhale and we hold our breath, that holds tension in the body, which disallows, number one, neurological firing to happen efficiently, and it also tells the muscle fibers that there's stress, there's something wrong, and that they need to hold on. So if you're holding your breath while you're practicing your yoga, which is kind of an oxymoron, but if the breath isn't working, nothing will work for you. You might get a little bit of change, but you're not going to get the transformation in your body and your life that you need. So remember that we expand on the inhale, let the exhale release. Exhalation releases the nervous system. Then we engage energy through the physical body and out. That's how transformation happens. If we're releasing the exhale, we have the opportunity to move a new neurological pattern through the body and out. Very, very important step. So notice if you're breathing. I'm going to give breathing cues all the way through so that you can kind of see how this works for you. So we're going to start out with you guys who are really tight, who can't get that right angle we talked about. You're just like, oh my God, it's so tight I don't even know where to start. So first off, in the forward bend, if you're really tight, you want to go wide-legged forward bend first. Reason being that you don't have as far to go here with the pelvis, and that stuff that's really tight in the inner thighs, that releases that a little bit so that it's not making it impossible for your pelvis to move. So go wide-legged. Find your kitchen table or a chair or 10 blocks if you're in yoga class, whatever it takes for you to be able to eventually get this right angle in your back. Find your feet facing forward, parallel. You take an inhale, expand. Let your exhale release. Feel the low belly pull back and up to begin to lift the pelvis up away from the heads of the femurs. So if you're really tight here, just doing that, that's all you need to do. All you're working for is to get the exhale to release, pull the pelvis up, again, towards the sky and get that rotation of the pelvis to get your glutes to release enough in here so that you can actually facilitate some stretch through your hamstrings. Otherwise, nothing happens. Pulls like we talked about on one end or the other. So, big breath in, exhale releases, belly pulls back and up to pull the pelvis up away from the heads of the femurs. So say I get about right here and I don't quite have it and I'm really tight, I'm going to bend my knees until I can get that right angle. And then I'm going to take a huge breath in, expand, let my exhale release, belly pulls back and up, lifts the pelvis. I'm going to engage energy through my feet and feel if I can feel that transfer. Release of the exhale, and I pull the pelvis up, send it through my feet. It's going to come through my inner thighs and connect all the way through to the top of my head. Again, remembering that every posture in yoga is a full body experience. It's not like you just stretch your hamstrings and everything else isn't connected. Connection is causal in physical postures in asana and in life. So inhale, expands. Exhale, releases. Belly pulls back to pull the pelvis up. Sends it through to the top of the head. I'm going to bend my knees again if I need to get that right angle. That makes sense? Take a few breaths there. It's more important for you, really more important for you to breathe, release, feel the connection of the energy pulling the pelvis up than it is for you to go anywhere in your mind or bend forward and look at all those other people maybe in your class that are all the way bent forward and you're like, I just need to get to the position. Remembering, yoga has no position, yoga has no time, it only has energy moving through. It's the energy moving through and the connection that facilitates the change. So, say you are a person that is really mobile, what we like to call, and we discussed, is hypermobile, long ligaments, and you can just come over here and hang. Okay, so I'm hanging. It looks like I'm in a forward bend, but you know what? I'm not doing anything here. I'm not creating any change because I'm not breathing. I'm not engaging energy through my body. So what happens in the mobily people who can just flop into everything is that eventually, if I'm hanging here, disengaged, I'm just hanging into my joints. And what happens there eventually is, especially in forward bending, the head of the femur kind of starts grinding into what's called your acetabulum, where that round part in your hip socket, if you look at a skeleton, all that hip socket, it just kind of hangs and grinds in there because there's nothing separating it or holding it and no engagement happening. And that's going to cause arthritis later on in life. Definitely. That's why so many ballet dancers, have hip replacements. It's going to cause grinding in there. It could also cause labral tears. The surface of that hip socket can get torn, and it's really painful. Not a good thing. So, if I'm mobile, super mobile, and again, if I'm hyperextended and my legs straight and beyond straight, I need to microbend that knee a little bit to get the energy to move all the way through. Otherwise, I'm going to get stuck in my knee joint. It's going to sit up in my hips. So, I'm going to inhale, expand. Exhale, release. Belly pulls back to pull the pelvis up away from the heads of the femurs. And as long as I have that space in there, I can begin to expand on the inhale, release on the exhale, suck that up, and transfer that from my feet through my inner thighs all the way through to the top of the head. Of course, I can come in here and hang and pull it closer, but that's not really doing anything. That's actually just going to hurt my joints. So, note to self, if you're hypermobile, get that going on. So once you can start to feel that engagement of the pelvis and lift and the energy coming through the feet and connecting to the head, then if you want to move forward a little bit more, if you're goal-oriented, it's yoga. Big breath in, exhale, release. As you pull your belly back to pull the tailbone up. So if I want to go farther forward, I'm not going to bend from the top of my body, right? Because that's going to disconnect me. I'm just going to focus on belly pulls back. I pull the pelvis up, and then I'm going to pull my low belly maybe a little bit closer to my thigh bone. And then expand, release, pull my belly back, pull the pelvis up, and eventually come forward. Not to say that you never release your back in your forward bend. That can happen, but I want to be doing that, especially if I have low back issues here, compromised flexibility in my hammies. I want to do that from a place where my tailbone's all the way up. So if my tailbone's up here, this low back's pretty safe. Then if I do this, that's not going to hurt anything. If that tailbone isn't up and I don't have that 90 degrees or so there in my pelvis and I come here, again, it's like that drawing. All the tension is going to go here. Nothing is going to happen, and you're going to go home with a really sore back, in worst case, a bulging disc. So there it is. I hope this information was helpful to you. You can find more information, educational videos at lifeyogaworld.com. We have a ton there on the blog site. Just go there, lots of different subjects. ASANA Tools is always happening. It's a progressive thing, so you can get more information there as you go. Also, if you go to Facebook and like the Life Yoga fan page, you can get a lot of information there. and also leave questions, comments, all sorts of good stuff on these videos. It helps me be able to give you better information and the information that you want. So this is Lynn from Lifeyoga. Have a great day. Take an inhale, exhale. Again, next time you forward bend, exhale releases, belly pulls back and up to pull the pelvis up. You create that nice right angle, fulcrum of the pelvis, can release you forward and allow you to have a safe and happy forward bend. Have a great day.